you ever seen a rat leap through the air? They will leap onto your face and bore straight into it. Sometimes they attack the eyes first. Sometimes they burrow through the cheeks and devour the tongue.
What do you want? Do it to her. Do it to Julia. I don't care what you do to her, but do it to her. Tear her face off and do it to Julia, not to me.
As your prescribed text for the Common Module, you are required to know 1984 in detail, demonstrating an understanding of how the text represents individual and collective human experiences, and the human qualities and emotions associated with, or arising from, these experiences. As you explore the prescribed text, you will gain insights into the anomalies, paradoxes, and inconsistencies in human behaviour and motivations represented through the distinctive qualities of the text. The module title is Texts and Human Experiences. It goes beyond the idea of experiences to the way these are represented and how that representation in turn affects future experiences. You will also need to consider the construction of the world within the text, analysing and evaluating the way key ideas and concepts, written language devices, structure, form, are used to shape these representations of human experiences. The examiner is looking for you to demonstrate in your analytical response how your experience of 1984 has invited you to see the world differently, challenge your assumptions, ignite new ideas, and reflect personally. And so, as a starting point for your personal reading of one of the great dystopias of the 20th century, you might reflect on why, years later, we are still engaged with the imagined world that Orwell constructs within his novel. Orwell's novel is about politics and the future. Orwell explores the individual and collective experience of political tyranny in his iconic speculative fiction. His own worldview was influenced by the geopolitical trends and power structures of post-World War II Europe. These factors led him to envisage a nightmare world in which totalitarian superstates ruled supreme over terrified citizens. As such, 1984 is a dystopian masterpiece and serves as Orwell's final warning about the dangers of totalitarianism, leader worship, and unquestioning submission to a power-hungry regime. The novel embeds key abstract notions about totalitarianism in striking, concrete images, visceral and easy to grasp: the thought police, thought crimes, doublethink, the permanent telescreen surveillance, and the notion that Big Brother is watching you, and ending with the terrors of Room 101 as a vision of the destruction of the self. We see the dystopian world of 1984 through the eyes of the protagonist, Winston, an anti-hero. Many critics argue Winston Smith is the author's mouthpiece for despair and how humanity has been stripped away and the individual destroyed by totalitarianism. 1984 represents Winston Smith's point of view through third-person narration. We see how the totalitarian society functions and its impact through his observations, in particular, through his illegal thoughts and actions as detected by spies and telescreens that monitor one's every movement. In this way, Orwell is able to demonstrate the effects of living in a paranoid society, as many of the judgments that Winston makes about the people around him, those who are spies loyal to the party, and those who are not, turn out to be inaccurate. Orwell therefore demonstrates that a society underpinned by paranoia, where personal relationships with others are at best tolerated and at worst illegal, trust between people is seriously diminished. Winston's views form the basis for the themes that we see emerging: his fascination with memory, his mistrust of the regime, his awareness of surveillance, his obsession with beautiful things of the past, his criticism of the rituals of the regime, all lead us to consider these aspects of human existence or human experiences. But to understand these ideas as themes, we have to go beyond what Winston says. We need to see how the book confirms or refutes Winston's ideas. Do the actions of the other characters convey the same ideas? What message does the conclusion leave us with? These questions should provide a starting point for your own reflections about the novel. Texts frequently demonstrate the individual and the collective experience as one of conflict, as the individual struggles to assert an identity against the group. 1984 does seem interested in the resources of human resistance. In the first part of the novel, Orwell invokes the power of private memory to resist the state's rewriting of history and explores the reserve of the unconscious. He explores the resistant potential of desire and sexuality, described as the force that would tear the party to shreds, and of purposeless art, represented by the useless beauty of the paperweight he cherishes that embodies a little chunk of history they had forgotten to alter. These are all dismantled by the party's reprogramming in the closing chapters of the book. Winston experiences the stirrings of rebellion against the party's tyranny. It begins with his evasion of the telescreen and the decisive act of keeping a diary. These acts are the culmination of years of internal monologue. However, his individual experience of rebellion is also accompanied by feelings of panic, anxiety, and paranoia. He foresees his downfall as a result of his thought crime. It's not a matter of if, but when Winston will be arrested and tortured and vaporized. Winston's human quality of defiance prevails as he continues to record his personal thoughts in an effort to communicate with the future. He writes in his secret diary, "Freedom is the freedom to say 2 + 2 are 4. When he is later tortured by the state authorities, this declaration is used against him. Winston must be trained in doublethink, the required capacity to privilege the truth recognised by power over the truth recognised by his own senses. Fiction shows us, as 1984 does, the nature of freedom, the exploration of what if, of alternative possibilities and alternative points of view, rather than alternative facts. And it affirms that truth is elusive, perhaps sometimes even indeterminate, but worth seeking out, and not to be taken on trust. There is a striking paradox at the heart of Orwell's novel. Reading and writing are means of discovering truths in ourselves, but they can be used against us, as Winston's diary is. Winston conforms outwardly to the party's routines, waking and exercising in time to orders from the telescreen. However, his dreams and thoughts are of the past, of the golden country, partial landscape to which his mind often returns. In Part 1, Chapter 3, our knowledge of Winston and the world in which he is isolated and confined is deepened. The reader follows Winston through episodes. We learn about Oceana, his inner life, sharing his thoughts, feelings and memories. The vision of his mother and baby sister sinking into dark water recurs in the novel, symbolic of the mutability of the past and the eradication of the human heritage. His parents and baby sister were killed when he was still a boy. This section highlights the loss of human feeling in 1984 and the breakdown of the family unit. The tragic he perceived belonged to the ancient time, to a time when there was still privacy, love, friendship, and when members of the family stood by one another without needing to know the reason. Today they were fear, hatred, pain, but no dignity of emotion, no deep or complex sorrows. Orwell espouses the vital importance of human emotion, as well as its fragility in modern times. As Frank H. Thompson Jr. writes in Orwell's Image of Goodwill, "The man of goodwill is the man of old-fashioned virtues, and Orwell believes in these. But in a world that believes in the new, the old-fashioned is but a foolish memory. In 1984, there is nothing old-fashioned because the world is created anew every day, a perpetual Eden turned upside down. Text can present individual experiences as a unifying force, but individual human experience is isolating in the world of 1984. Doubt and fear destroy hope of connection and community. Fundamentally, all the feelings in the book seem to be contradictory. One of the crucial questions about 1984 is whether Orwell is interested in the potential for opposition to the totalitarian state, or if his last book offers only despair. 1984 centres on a triangular relationship between the protagonist Winston Smith, his lover Julia, and O'Brien, an older official of the ruling elite. When Winston Smith first thinks about Julia, the girl that he will fall in love with, he hates her. He wants to shoot her full of arrows like St. Sebastian, he says, or quash her with a rubber truncheon.
With party members.
Yes.
Part 2 focuses on the developing relationship between Winston
with those
Smith and
bastards.
Julia.
There's plenty who would.
The experience of physical intimacy with Julia sparks mixed feelings for Winston, including protectiveness towards Julia and a sense of victory over the party. As he studies Julia's naked body, Winston's thoughts about emotions are revealed in the narration. You could not have pure love or pure lust nowadays. No emotion was pure, because everything was mixed up with fear and hatred. Their embrace had been a battle, the climax of victory. It was a blow struck against the party. It was a political act. Winston and Julia's room over the shop, with its apparent safe enclosure, is also evocative of the past world surviving tenuously among the proles. The world of private loyalties, emotionally charged sexuality, and simple decency. The room contains an old paperweight, a little chunk of history the party overlooked. A message from 100 years ago, a richly symbolic and fragile object that elegantly speaks volumes when contrasted with the massive pyramids of the ministries. Lying in bed with Julia in their room, Winston observes the paperweight was the room he was in, and the coral was Julia's life and his own, fixed in a sort of eternity at the heart of the crystal. The fragile paperweight correlates with Winston and Julia's love, an apparently safe enclosure, and with the world of the past. The pyramids correlate with hierarchy, bureaucracy on monumental scale, and the crushing totalitarian power. Centrally, the paperweight correlates with a past in which people could be governed by private loyalties and value individual relationships, a world where a completely helpless gesture, an embrace, could have value. Yet their relationship is a futile act, and as we witness Winston betray Julia in Room 101, we realise more fully that love and hate are inseparable in this book. As Winston Smith even foreshadows in Chapter 4, folly, folly, his heart kept saying, conscious, gratuitous, suicidal folly. Of all the crimes that a party member could commit, this one was the least possible to conceal. Folly, 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 he thought again. So how does Orwell use the triangular relationship between Winston, his lover Julia, and O'Brien to reveal inconsistencies in human behaviour and thus experience? You might consider Winston's contradictory feelings about O'Brien, who will torture him at the end of the book. And it is also true of his feelings politically on a larger scale about Big Brother. At the very end of the novel, Winston says that he loves Big Brother, but for much of the book he also hates him as well, or moves between the two, or finds the two inseparable, hatred and love. O'Brien has a complex role in the novel. He is an enemy, protector, seducer, betrayer. Orwell explores Winston's admiration and intrigue regarding O'Brien at the opening of the novel. He is deeply drawn to him and expresses affection for O'Brien when he visits his house in an attempt to join the Brotherhood. In Part 3, Chapter 2, in Room 101, when tortured, an interesting anomaly occurs in Winston's feelings towards his tormentor. Instead of loathing O'Brien, Winston feels deep love and gratitude. He had never loved him so deeply as at this moment, and not merely because he had stopped the pain. The old feeling, that at the bottom it did not matter whether O'Brien was a friend or an enemy, had come back. O'Brien was a person who could be talked to. Perhaps one did not want to be loved so much as to be understood. At the conclusion of the novel, Winston loves Big Brother. This is the only sanctioned love in Oceania. He is forced to portray Julia by O'Brien, a personification of the party, transferring his loyalty to the party. Here, Orwell represents the fragility of human resistance and resilience, as O'Brien delves into the deepest emotions to reject and portray Julia and love Big Brother instead. So, 1984 might be a novel that is full of people feeling deeply ambivalent. Winston feels ambivalent about his mother, about his memory, about the party, about almost everyone that he meets, in which there's the most intense loathing and disgust on the one hand, but also abject submission or passionate attachment on the other. And so now, to use this video as a starting point, you should continue to analyse some of the ideas presented in more depth, or further reflect on the collective experiences represented in Orwell's novel.